This is 15 minutes of impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Desk. In this episode of the USEA Podcast, we're going to talk with Aaron Halimi, founder and president of solar project developer Renewable Properties. Aaron's going to describe the impacts on large-scale solar developers of changes to tax credits and other incentives imposed by the just passed budget bill. Since Aaron founded Renewable Properties in 2017, the company has completed development, construction, and financing on 53 projects and currently has over a gigawatt and a half of solar storage and EV charging stations under development across 220 projects in 16 states. Earlier in his over 17-year career, Aaron led solar development for Gardner Capital and for Borrego Energy. So, Aaron, it looks like the changes in tax credits and other incentives for solar in this just passed budget bill are going to have a really significant impact for developers. Let's start with you maybe summarizing the changes that are really high on your radar and talk about what their impacts are going to be. When will they hit? Because they're staggered. Some things are going to hit soon, some things are going to hit a little bit later. Is solar going to be more expensive? Is there going to be less solar development? Are we going to lose jobs? Give us your lowdown.
Yeah, happy to, and happy to be here. Thanks for having me. The big beautiful bill was not very beautiful as it relates to the solar industry at large, primarily shortening the runway with the investment tax credit that the IRA provided us a few years ago, which we were all very excited about. More specifically, there's a couple key dates as we look to the new paradigm or the new reality that we're working with. The first date is by end of 2025. So if you're to start construction by end of 2025, you can effectively safe harbor or remove the new FEOC restriction, foreign entity of concern restrictions that are now inherent in the investment tax credit. So
We're
that's
going to
kind of
talk
the
about that more. We're going to talk about that more in a few minutes, but let's
yeah,
talk
so
about
that's
the
the
things.
yeah, so that's the first relevant date to your question. And then the second relevant date is July, I believe it's 2nd or early July, before July 4th, 2026 is the next construction start date, where you want to start construction before that date to have your full 4 year of runway to come online. If you don't start construction before, call it July 2nd, 2026, you then have to come online by the end of 2027. And that's all relevant because we all in the industry rely on a construction safe harbor provision, which allows us to come online within 4 years of starting construction. So that's my long way of saying, in the new paradigm, depending on if you start construction by end of 2025 or middle 2026, we have about 4.5 years of runway for solar as we know it, or solar under the pricing paradigm as we know it. And
But
that's relevant.
that's only if you start construction by those dates, and that's going to
Correct.
be an issue, right?
Well, yeah. So look, to start construction by those dates, you have to have projects that you're confident in, and you have to have access to capital. You have to have access to a lot of capital in order to start construction. And so it has caused a rush for solar project developers to secure equipment from vendors across the industry. It's also caused a rush for developers to go to their capital providers to ask for more capital. And not everybody under the sun, if you will, is going to be able to get both of those things done. So that does create a problem. Typically, we see that with the smaller developers that maybe are not as well capitalized as the larger to medium-sized developers. But it's something that you have to do if you're going to play during this transition period. So, I don't like that the investment tax credit is going to sunset quicker than it originally was. I think it's going to dramatically increase electricity prices in a much shorter time horizon than we were already going to see occur due to some supply demand imbalances on the grid in terms of the demand from data centers and AI and the electrification of everything and the onshore manufacturing to electric vehicles. to the supply constraints of these infrastructure projects that we develop. It's no secret, it takes a while to get infrastructure built. In the United States, it takes a while to get through the interconnection queues. And so we can't react so quickly to those increases in demand as you might hope for. So that's my long. Oh yes, go ahead.
One of the questions I wanted you to answer was, is solar development going to drop off? And that goes to what you were just saying, because solar is one of the fastest ways to build energy. It takes a lot longer to build a nuclear plant or even a natural gas plant. There's delays in delivery of natural gas turbines for 4 years. You can build a solar plant in 2 years. So but with this change in incentives, is development going to drop off? And I guess that means you're going to lose jobs, right?
Yeah. Look, I think despite the federal administration's desire to kill solar, we're not dead. We're not slowing down. The underlying market dynamics have never been better for energy developers in the United States. To your point, solar and storage represented 85% of new electricity generation added to the grid just last year. You cannot add new generation to this grid without renewables. Renewables are the lion's share of it. So what does that mean? It means that we now are talking about a period of time where we're transitioning from a paradigm where we have an incentive in the investment tax credit to a period where we will not have that investment tax credit. And so that's where these key construction start dates and safe harbor provisions play into an orderly transition. But over time, we're going to get to a world where the tax credit doesn't exist, a post-incentive world. And what's going to happen? Well, electricity prices are going to have to come up, right? Solar is going to continue to meet a growing demand, and the demand far outpaces the supply. And so if you're on the demand side of it, you're ultimately going to have to be a price taker, which is different. I mean, I've been in this business for 17 years. When I started out in solar, the utility companies or the energy procurement companies, they controlled all the power on the negotiation table, right? There was hundreds of developers chasing very few opportunities. The pendulum has swung back to where there's countless energy buyers chasing few projects that are actually in a stage where they could be built and delivered on time. And so that's been a very interesting dynamic to see over the last couple years, and I foresee that really increasing, that spread or that dynamic increasing dramatically over the next 2 to 5 years as well.
Without the tax credits, solar is going to be more expensive, I would think. It's still probably the cheapest form of utility scale power, but it's going to be more expensive. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe will it remain cost competitive with other forms of generation?
Yeah, it's all relative, right? So solar is the cheapest form of electricity generation to date, solar plus storage even. And we will continue to be cost competitive despite prices needing to go up to offset the hit from losing that investment tax credit.
Well, I want to talk about something you mentioned already. Eventually we're going to get to some questions about financing and some other things. But first, this foreign entities of concern, or FEOC, some people call it FEOC. Some people have less polite names for it. But what is it exactly, and how's it going to affect solar development?
Great question. I call it FEOC. To simplify the conversation, really what the administration was getting at is China. So we can refer to it as China as well. But basically, there's a provision now to comply with the investment tax credit that a certain percentage of your equipment cannot come from an entity that is a foreign entity of concern, a FEOC and or China. For solar, it's important, and it's going to, be tough to deal with. But I'm not as concerned about solar and the supply chain there because it's truly a global supply chain at this juncture. Now, there are other FEOC provisions around. Not only does the equipment need to be manufactured and sourced outside of a FEOC, but a FEOC cannot ultimately own or control the company that you're buying that equipment from. Really, again, it's another set of incentives to say, don't buy from China, buy from somebody else.
It should be, let me just interrupt you for a second, Aaron, because I want you to make sure and mention this. The IRA had provisions to try and drive the manufacture of solar in all its pieces to the United States. It was
Yeah.
a kind of an orderly set of provisions, and it was thoroughly worked over by the Treasury Department. And so this this fiat is a little different because it's a little more heavy-handed, like so many other things from this administration. Um, and is it going to require that same careful workover by the Treasury Department? Could that be a wrench in the works?
Yeah, it's a great question. And really, we went from a set of incentives that you could call the carrot, right, with domestic content adders and onshore manufacturing credits, to the stick, right, with fiat being a full a penalty. And yeah, you're astute to mention that Treasury is going to have to rule on how fiat is implemented, but in the big beautiful bill, there's a provision that provides guidance on how we are to incorporate fiat or interpret it in the interim period, and they actually base it off a similar table that's used for the domestic content adder, which is still in place. And so that's the interim compliance period. And then you're right, I think it's by end of 2026 that Treasury has to come out with more final or formal finalized guidance around fiat.
Interesting. A lot of the things you've been talking about represent what we'll call potential uncertainty in the industry. And if there's one thing we know, it's people with money don't like uncertainty. And so, what does this mean in terms of financing solar projects? You know, these are $100 million projects, I think, and banks and major sources of revenue are involved in financing them. And even you, I'm sure you have daddy warbucks, Aaron Halimi probably needs to go to these big sources of capital to get your projects built. What's going to happen with financing in the current timeline and in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, there's no doubt about it. This is a capital intensive business. We are always in the market raising capital, and investors do not like uncertainty. Fortunately, project level investment, project level tax equity and debt is still very robust for projects that are late stage, right? That can be delivered within a time frame that's reasonable. I would foresee
where they're going to be able to capture the tax credits.
Correct, because really we've got a 4 to 4.5 to 5 year, depending on which of those stop gates I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you're kind of working off of runway here with certainty. And as you get to the end of that runway, there's going to be more uncertainty around your ability to deliver within the window you need to. And so right now there's a bit of a rush for people to invest in viable projects today. But over the horizon, that's going to change. I'd say, again, we've seen investors, both tax equity and lenders, have a flight to quality. So folks say, we're not taking on any new customers because there's a lot to kind of deal with onboarding a new developer. And we just want to be placing capital with the developers that are our best, right? The folks that we know can deliver on time and on budget. So there's kind of a flight to quality, if you will. Now that's on the project side. On the corporate side, we've seen really a grinding halt to the corporate capital markets in the last 3 to 4 months, basically since Liberation Day, starting with the trade uncertainty, then piggybacking into the budget reconciliation bill uncertainty. And even today, while the budget bill is passed, it's the kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. The federal government issued an executive order to the Treasury to issue new revised guidance in 45 days, which is middle of August. So we're in this other period now where some of the things I'm talking about with construction start and safe harbor may change ever so slightly. And so continued uncertainty is bad for capital raising. This is a capital intensive business, but at the end of the day, the fundamentals are still so strong that if you have a viable project that is fully developed and ready to be built, it can come online in a reasonable period of time. You can get access to that capital and you can get that deal done.
Well, that's going to be good news. Let me ask you a sort of a corollary to that conversation. batteries still have the investment tax credit. It's the same, almost the same tax credit that was in the IRA. Is it possible that some of these people with money would be interested in financing retrofits of the so many utility scale solar projects out there that don't have batteries, that were built before batteries became cost competitive? Does this incentive for batteries potentially mean that a lot more solar projects could be financed for retrofits to have storage, especially in a market where quote unquote firm generation is becoming more and more valuable? Do you see that as a something that might happen?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about storage because I meant to touch on it in an earlier comment, and I guess I will start with I've never been as bullish about energy storage as I am now, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. One is obviously there's a lot of runway with the ITC, but two is we really have a capacity problem here in the United States. And in terms of new capacity additions, nothing is competitive from a cost perspective as standalone energy storage. So I foresee a lot of energy storage being deployed in the immediate and long term. As it relates to, a repower or a retrofit, there's some questions around ITC eligibility. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced than, hey, the runway on the ITC is going to lead for more repowers with energy storage. Given solar is still the fuel source there, you won't be able to qualify ITC on the solar portion. So I think what's probably more likely is instead of maybe a repower or add-on is that folks will start deploying standalone storage near or adjacent to existing solar projects in order to fully capture the financial benefits of that ITC. I am concerned, while I am bullish on storage, and this goes to your fiat question, I kind of said, hey, look, fiat doesn't concern me that much for solar. I'm very concerned as it
Yeah.
relates for the energy storage supply chain. Right now, majority of the energy storage supply chain as we know it in terms of lithium ion batteries, which is by far the most dominant or the only technology used, is almost 100% in China. And so that's concerning to me. And the question is, can that supply chain move to more global in scale quick enough to meet the insatiable demand that we have here in the United States? And that's the what if, and that's the question. And I have faith that we're going to figure it out. You're already seeing some big battery manufacturers make investments here in the United States for domestic content reasons. Again, someone reminded me the other day, complying with fiat is easier than complying with domestic content. Fiat could actually be made anywhere as long as it's not China, whereas domestic content has to be made in the United States. And then, look, there's a couple other countries in that fiat definition. I think it's Russia, North Korea, and maybe Iran. But, in terms of like where most of the energy, supply chain is for practical purposes, it's China.
Well, we'll see how that works out. That could be really big news if we see this battery storage growth that you're thinking about. One more question, Aaron. It's for our friends who advocate for a concept of solar that, by the way, I have been bullish on for a very long time. I think it's a wonderful idea. It hasn't gotten enough attention. That's community solar. Tell us, what's the difference between utility scale solar and community solar, and what's going to happen with community solar in this new incentive world?
Great question. Community solar in its simplest form provides access to solar for those that otherwise wouldn't have access to it. So if you don't have the means to put solar on your home, if your roof doesn't have the right geometry, if you are a low to moderate income person, if you're a small business, if you rent in an apartment and you want solar, but again, otherwise don't have a way to get solar or benefit from both cost savings and the environmental benefits of solar, community solar is a regulatory construct that provides for that access. It allows those types of people to subscribe to a solar project that's offsite and that generates a bill credit. Those consumers or subscribers will get that bill credit at a discount, so it will be reflective on savings on their utility bill. And then they're also able to, be demand that is spurring more renewable energy, coming onto the grid. And so that's what community solar is. utility solar is what it sounds like. It's a solar project that contracts directly with the utility company and sells power to them on a wholesale basis. At Renewable Properties, we actually do both. I think to date, it's been about a 40-60 split in terms of, I think 60% of what we've completed construction and development on is community solar. Another 40% is utility offtake agreements. So we do both. We're familiar with both. And in terms of financing, they're similar, financing mechanisms, if you will. And in terms of the benefits, there's a whole plethora of benefits to individual subscribers. Primarily, it's access and savings and grid reliability, in that those projects are on the distribution level. So they're typically sited closer to load, closer to where that electricity is being consumed. And it can also provide a variety of other grid benefits. Deferring transmission upgrades, for example, is one of them. And so there's a whole laundry list of benefits there. I'd say community solar, I still see succeeding in a post-ITC world. That's primarily because majority of the regulatory constructs or revenue frameworks, if you will, has a portion or 100% of the rate floats and is either indexed to a retail rate or a wholesale power price. And so why I'm bullish on that is, as I mentioned earlier, it is inevitable that electricity prices are going to rise here in the United States. In fact, they already have risen dramatically over the last 12 months. I mean, you can even look at the PJM, the recent capacity auction at PJM actually hitting the price cap for the first time just about a week ago. There's plenty of anecdotes out there in terms of what we are seeing today and where this is going. And so community solar benefits in that it's kind of gonna ride that wave as well.
When you sign up for community solar, you usually get a rate that's more or less fixed, don't you? So you know what your cost of electricity is going to be, regardless of what happens with prices.
Yeah, your discount is fixed. That's right. So if you're a subscriber, you would sign up for like a 10, it could be a 5, 10, or 15% discount, depending on the market. And so you as a subscriber are always going to get that discount, but your electricity price is going to continue to fluctuate just like it would normally. And as the developer, as the owner of that system, the price that you're able to sell is floating with that retail price as well. So you as the consumer are going to get those savings locked in. I think that's what you're pointing out to the listeners, is like signing up with community solar is what you should do if you want a savings on your utility bill and you can't afford or have the means or the living situation to put solar on your rooftop. That's the way to go.
No, now that you mentioned it, I think we should do a few podcasts on community solar and talk to some of the solar developers, but not today. We're out of time, Aaron. I got to close it up. I want to thank my guest, Renewable Properties founder and president Aaron Halimi, for describing the impacts on solar project development of the just passed budget bill's tax credit and incentive changes. And our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.